I had you got stuck with babysitting duty this year. How'd you manage that?
Oh, I don't know. I suppose I failed someone who richly deserved it.
Oh, the Osgood kid? Yeah, he was a real asshole. Rich and dumb. Popular combination around here.
Hello, loyal listeners, and welcome to another episode of Hollywood Gold. I'm your host, Daniela Taplin Lundberg, and I'm here with Bex Camerata. Bex, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
We're knocking through these things.
We're on a podcast roll.
Podcast roll. I'm so excited to jump into today's episode about the Holdovers. We're about to interview writer and producer David Hemingson. And David was also just nominated for an Oscar for the script. So he's truly been there from the beginning. And I'm so excited to get into the story and how he sort of managed to write such an authentic version of like the East Coast boarding school scene and these characters. So let's get going.
Let's do it.
David Hemingson, it is so great to have you on the pod. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. It's totally my pleasure.
And congratulations on this big Oscar nomination. You must be just like walking on our air a little bit. Yeah,
no, I'm thrilled. I mean, it's honestly a dream come true. I've been a movie buff since I was, God, for as long as I can remember. I think the first movie I saw in the theater, I want to say I remember Thoroughly Modern Melly. I don't even know what that is.
Sure.
And then there's another story where my uncle threw me in the trunk of an old Delta 88 because he wanted to go see Vanishing Point with Barry Newman, like 71, and I was like 5. So I've been smuggled into drive-ins. I was like, brought in as a toddler. So movies are kind of my lifeblood. So this is a thrill for me.
I grew up in LA, and one of my first movie experiences in a theater, my stepdad was a writer-director, and he was directing a movie on the MGM lot called Cannery Row, little known Nick Nolte, Deborah Winger rom-com. And he had just written
based on the John Steinbeck book.
Yes, it was like a collab of 2 John Steinbeck novels.
Was Deborah Winger in that one too?
Yes.
Yeah. See, I remember that one.
Okay, amazing. Well, then you are a movie buff. You truly are a movie buff. But in any event, I was 4 years old, and my stepbrother convinced my dad to screen Star Wars. And they were like, there's this really scary monster, Chewbacca, but don't be scared because he's a good guy. And I just remember being like expecting to be so scared by Chewie, but he was actually like a lovable big guy. So anyways, that's my first film buff memory. But let's get back to this incredible story of the Holdovers. You are the writer and also a producer. So I feel like, David, you were probably there from beginning to end. And so you can tell the whole narrative. So why don't you start from the beginning? I've done my homework and I know a little bit, but I want to hear it from your perspective, like your first memory. And I know there was a pilot of a television show and, it kind of came together magically. So talk to me.
It's weird kind of magical confluence of circumstances. So about 6 years ago, I decided to write something that was like really, really personal. I've been in television now, because I include these years as television years as well, because I write some TV, about 28 years. So, for me, I've been really blessed, really lucky to have had this career. I have worked with some amazing people on some amazing shows. I've created some great shows. But over the course of my time in network television, which is principally what I was doing, I never really got to sort of air out what I wanted to do about kind of like my own kind of personal emotional landscape. You kind of want to go back and think, what really touched me? What really moved me? What were the motivating factors that maybe want to be a writer or that keep me going today, just, spiritually almost, emotionally. And I thought to myself, well, I look back at my formative years in junior high and high school, and that was really a pivot point for me because I was this lower middle class kid. My folks got divorced when I was about 4 or 5 years old. It was very acrimonious. It was the 60s. Back in the day, a woman who was divorced, like, wouldn't have a credit card in her own name. My mom didn't have a credit card. So we were just like kind of broke,
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up getting the ferocious intervention of this fantastic guy named Earl Cahill, who was my mother's sister's husband. He was my uncle by marriage, and he kind of stepped in and kind of shaped me up. He was a World War II veteran who taught on Saipan, an amazing guy. Ended up running the press office at the United Nations, but would come in from New York City with my aunt and kind of interpose himself into my young life. And so he was this huge influence on me. And around the same time, actually, as I got a little older, I ended up going to this private school because I was going to get my ass kicked in the public school. And this private school was, my dad was teaching there. I hadn't seen my dad in a while, really. We've been kind of strange. And so he ended up teaching there. He was a merchant seaman who basically ran away from home when he was 15, joined the Merchant Marine in World War II, was on those Liberty ships when they were invading Omaha Beach, that kind of thing, and bringing over ammunitions, bringing back war brides, like this crazy life, and spent 12 years in the Merchant Marine, then the Navy, and then ended up going to Yale on the GI Bill, having never really applied, and not even having a high school diploma. The guy was amazing, brilliant guy, mysterious to me. But anyway, I ended up going to this school, and it was called the Watkinson School in Hartford, Connecticut. And I had approached it because I was sort of this strange, bookish kid, having been fed all this literature by my uncle, like, Tom Brown's School Days, Tom Brown at Oxford, Tom Brown, all these Thomas Hughes novels from the 1880s, and like Thackeray and Dickens, like all this weird literature.
Oh my God. And sorry, did you have siblings or were you an only child?
No, only child. Only an only child would get saturated with this weird ass shit. So like, I kind of grew up on these books and I had this illusion about what the school was going to be like. And I found a brochure from like 1950 and it was very sort of ivy covered and like rep ties and, blue blazers and stuff. And I'm like, this will be cool. This will be like a transformative experience. So I get to the school, and at the time when I got there in '76, it was very much like not what I expected. I mean, basically, at the time, it had sort of shifted emphasis and had started taking on all these kids who got kicked out of the other really good schools. So it's as though like Max
like
Fisher
Groton and Deerfield, like they were going to your school?
Yeah, Groton and Deerfield and Rosemary Hall. And like, if you got booted, you kind of went to my school at the time. But I didn't know that. So I showed up there like totally like Max Fisher with the tie and the coat and the
love that
blazer.
Rushmore reference. Oh, thank you very much.
It's like Max Fisher from Rushmore shows up in the high school, Rushmore turns out to be the high school from Dazed and Confused.
You're literally referencing every film that I love, like from that era. Yeah. Like about high school. Yeah, go ahead.
That was a pilot. So I wrote this pilot basically that sort of was called Stonehaven. It was about that story. And my agent, now manager, who is renowned for having like the best taste and the worst bedside manner, read this thing and he's like, wow, this is really emotionally evocative and really kind of stirring. And it seems very personal to you. It's like, it's very well crafted. I love the characters. It's unique. It's original. I'm like, oh, thank you. He said, we can't do anything with this. I mean, I don't know why you wrote it. I mean, it's completely not marketable and no one's going to buy a show set in 1980 about a kid in a prep school with his uncle and it's good, but it's useless.
It's a great writing sample, David. Good work.
Yeah, exactly. Congratulations on like pouring this writing sample that will never go anywhere with anything. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm used to it from him because all those years. And I go off and I end up creating the show called Whiskey Cavalier on ABC. But I sort of like was like, okay, I'll put that aside. And I go off and create a whiskey. And that was shooting in Prague. So I was a showrunner, so I'd fly back and forth a lot. And it was really exhausting. Look, I'm very fortunate. It was a great experience, but it was very tiring. And I remember flying back, like a 14-hour flight, 9-hour time difference in my car. And what I didn't know was my agent had given the Stonehaven, the prep school pilot, to another client of his who knew Alexander Payne from film school. And it turns out that Alexander had spent about a decade, actually a dozen years, he says, trying to crack the idea that he had, this log line he had for this kind of odiferous, kind of ocularly challenged professor, stuck over Christmas with these 5 boys, one of whom his mother is, I think, left him because she just remarried.
Based on this like French film, possibly?
Yeah,
Mère Louise?
yes, like 1934, like a 90-year-old French film.
Yeah.
So it's the same premise as this 90-year-old French film. So I was like, I didn't know any of this at the time. And I get this phone call in my car and I just pick it up and I'm driving back from LAX and I'm exhausted. I'm on the 405 and the voice on the line says, David Hemingson, Alexander Payne. And I have a friend who likes to prank me consistently, and he's done this in the past. Like about 15 years ago, he called me up and he really got me hook, line, and sinker. He kind of got on the phone and said, David Hemingson, Francis Ford Coppola. And I said, oh my God, this is fantastic. I mean, I can't, this is remarkable. How nice to speak to you, Mr. Coppola. I don't.
You took it seriously.
Seriously, no, I was not bullshitting. He was so good. I thought, this is fantastic. I thought, what a remarkable experience. Like 15 years ago, I was interested in why are you calling me? He said, well, I'm interested in perhaps collaborating with you on a project. I was like, I would be honored. He's like, fuck you, you're an idiot. Like, why would Coppola call you? It's me. Let's go get a beer. We have fun. We're comedy writers. We have fun. So I assumed that this was just like another thorough and very aggressive chain yanking. And so for a hot minute, I almost hung up the phone. And then I looked down and I saw the Omaha area code and I knew, okay. Because I said, is this actually Alexander Payne? It's like, yeah. I mean, last time I checked, yeah, I am Alexander Payne. I said, what can I do for you? And he sort of explained that he had this log line about this kind of odoriferous, ocularly challenged professor stuck at prep school with these kids.
I love the ocularly challenged. I would just say wonky eye, but I appreciate that. I'm going to just use that.
But yeah, wonky eye, basically. And so he was like, would you consider writing this for me? And, that's like Charlie Bucket with the golden ticket. And well, when you get the golden ticket, you say yes immediately,
Mm-hmm.
Didn't talk about, terms or conditions immediately. I mean, the guy, he's kind of a cultural icon. Like, I think he's a great director.
100%.
I think he's one of the living directors. So when you find out it's not bullshit, you agree immediately. At least that was my perspective. And so, yeah, I agreed immediately. And he said, threshold question, 1958 or 1970. And I said, immediately, I was like, I think 1970.
I love that.
Thank you. He said, he said, why? I said, because, well, 2018, it was 2018 at the time, has more in common with 1970 than it does with 1950. I mean, in 2018, we had a huge amount of racial injustice going on in this country. We still do. We had a forever war going. We had all this intense, social upheaval. And it felt much more like 1970 to me than 1958. He's like, I think you're right. And then I said, plus, I think Peter Weir owns 1958. And he said, I'm sorry, come again? And then I realized, have I just insulted this guy accidentally? This
You're
is not
making
a good way-
reference to Dead Poets Society, of
Dead
course.
Poets Society. So for BD, he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I just, he said, oh, Dead Poets Society. I said, yeah. He said, we don't want to do that. I said, good. So I'm like, great. And so that was sort of the inciting incident of the whole thing. Like, he asked me to do it. When Alexander Payne calls you, you say yes. And I said yes. And here we are 6 years later, but there's a long journey in between. But that was sort of how it all started.
Unbelievable. But I have to say, because like this era and this sort of like echelon of the world fascinates me. I grew up in LA, but my dad went to Princeton. I went to Princeton. And those kids come in and it's a different world. Like the boarding school world on the East Coast. First of all, it's a privilege to go to those schools. And where I came from, if you got shipped to boarding school, that was like you were a bad kid. And it was just like a different ilk. They were like so much more mature. And like it's a very unique thing that Hollywood has tried to get right. And it's very hard. It's very hard to do unless you've lived through it, which you obviously, there is like an authenticity to your writing and the world that is incredible.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, Watkinson was actually a day school, but what happened was I spent so much time, because I ran and debated, I spent a lot of time at boarding schools and I spent a lot of time with boarding school friends. And the experience at Watkinson was so similar in some respects because my dad was teaching there. I was there all the time. So I was effectively like living there. But yeah, I definitely steeped in New England prep school culture. Absolutely, yeah.
Did you feel like Alex was picking your brain? Like describe what the dynamic was like, because you were sort of the authentic voice, right? You really knew the world, and I'm sure that's what attracted him to you. So talk about that process.
I think what he wanted some degree of absolute authenticity was front of mind in terms of the New England prep school experience, the boarding school experience. I think he also liked sort of the emotional dynamic of the pilot in terms of it was grounded in this sort of emotional matrix between these people and this kid trying to find himself and this older man trying to like help him without sort of coddling him, So I think what he wanted from me principally was sort of like an idea of what that both a real authentic sense of what that prep school experience was going to be like circa 1970, which was a number of years before I would have actually gotten there. So it entailed some research. But not that much, because I started in 76 and there was definitely a carryover. So it was that. But there was also like, what would this relationship that was going to underpin the central thrust of the narrative, what was this relationship going to look like between these actually originally was this teacher and these students, because we didn't even have, it was going to be one student and Mary hadn't entered the picture yet.
Oh.
And then again, second question, and the second conversation is, hey, how do you feel about Paul Giamatti? And it's great because whenever I can write for someone, my job becomes so much easier.
So Alex had that right away. He was like, Paul Giamatti's the guy.
Pretty much, after we had a threshold conversation and he figured out that I might be the guy, and then we kind of agreed to do it. Literally the next time we spoke was like, hey, how do you feel about Paul Giamatti? And I said, I think Paul Giamatti is a genius, because he is a genius. He's an incredible actor, phenomenal actor. And I've been a huge fan of his, just like I've been a huge fan of Alexander's. And weirdly, our dads knew each other in college, and I knew that. I knew that Paul's dad and my dad knew each other in college.
Wasn't Paul's dad like worked at Yale or was the president of Yale or
I was the president of Yale University. Yeah, when I was there, I went there as a scholarship student. And I found out that our dads knew each other because on graduation, day before graduation, you meet the president on Science Hill, and you have a card they give you with your name and your college affiliation printed on it. And you're supposed to give it to the secretary, and the secretary whispers in the president's ear, like, David Hemingson. So I did this along with 1,000 other members of my class, and I was in the first third of the alphabet, and so he wasn't exhausted, and he got the card, and he said, "Oh, Hemingson. David, is your father Richard Hemingson?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "He was in a Chaucer seminar with me." So the weirdest thing was, like, he knew my dad, like Bart Giamatti knew my dad, and I knew this when I graduated. So it was almost kind of destiny.
100%. I got the chills. That's amazing.
Strange, isn't it crazy?
Yeah.
And the other thing is that's crazy is we were born in the same hospital. We grew up in the same town. Our dads knew each other. Like, Paul and I have this weird kind of connection in that regard. So when he said Paul Giamatti, and I'd never met Paul. Actually, I met him. I ran into him briefly once when he was playing Harvey Picard in American Splendor at a party. And I was like, gosh, I was a slobbering fanboy then. I was hoping he wouldn't remember if this did happen, that I was such a slobbering fanboy and like, gushing all over him for like private parts and like, Cinderella Man. And like, he's a great actor. So
did he remember that? Did he remember that moment?
He didn't remember, thank God, the encounter.
Okay, good. Yeah. It's like the story of your life and not the story of his. Like someone told me that.
Yeah. Like, I was totally like, I was just some random weirdo at a party.
Sir, I don't understand.
That's glaringly apparent.
No, I can't fail this class.
Oh, don't sell yourself short, Mr. Coates. I truly believe that you can. All right, you fetid layabouts. Stay late in the swamp. Arise!
He's a great actor. So I said, absolutely, Paul Giamatti. So that arose fairly quickly. And then it became a question of what was the arc going to look like vis-a-vis this teacher and these kids? The two most salient things were that and Alexander said, okay, since we're doing it in 1970, I want that 1970 tone. So I want it to be kind of reminiscent of like a Hal Ashby film. I said, I love Hal Ashby. That's great. Yeah. You had to figure out, one, what was the story going to be? I had the premise. What was the story? And then two, how was I going to make this a 70s movie? So what's the story going to be? And I started sniffing around the topic of like, okay, we got this guy, we got these kids. What if, because he's kind of odoriferous and ocularly challenged, and I came up with this image of like a heap of rumpled corduroys. It's like this heap of rumpled corduroy.
Love that.
What if he had some sort of romance that had spoiled or curdled early in his life, or there was some tragedy that occurred, and he's stuck at school with these kids, and they decided they're going to go find the woman who broke his heart. And so I did kind of these little short stories that I send to Alexander, and he'd read them. And he's, in addition to being a brilliant guy, he's a really, really polite Midwestern guy from Nebraska, so very congenial,
Yeah.
And he'd read these little stories and go like, I like this. This is sort of like got kind of a Raymond Carver Roald Dahl feeling to it. I'm like, oh, thank you. Because I like it's kind of interesting, and it's it's kind of like my agent with the pilot. He's like, I don't want to tell this story, but I like it. I'm like, oh, okay. So and finally I said to him, because he's so he wanted me to find it. He wasn't going to leave me because he wanted the genuine experience. I said, the cut and thrust of this, what is it about it that needs to adjust? He's like, I just think this guy's life is largely over, but the kids' lives aren't. I'm like, that's all I need to know.
Oh my God. Brilliant direction. Here's the thing that helps illuminate for you where you're going.
And then I started thinking back to our Dead Poets conversation. I said, no, it's not the kids, it's the kid, And I'm like, so I need a kid. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do a version of myself. I think Angus, like, okay, but I'll update him. He'll be kind of alienated. He'll be kind of cauterized from a broken family. It'll be an interesting sort of examination. And then what is his problem? So then I started searching for like, how do I make this as emotionally resonant as possible? And I thought to myself, we need a maternal energy. And I was incredibly close to my mom, very, very close to my mom, because, we were that was just the nature of our relationship. I loved her very much. And we were, she sacrificed everything for me. She'd get up at 4:45 in the morning. She was a registered nurse and go to work so she could be home in time to make me dinner when I got back from school. Just a very giving, loving, strong person. And I thought that would be a great energy. And I lost her fairly young. And I thought to myself, okay, who would be left at school that could provide the maternal energy? I'm like, a nurse? Yes, a nurse. But it seems kind of odd that there'd be a nurse there. I said, but who could be there would be like a cafeteria manager, because she might stay back. What if she'd lost her son? What if I flipped the dynamic? And as opposed to me losing my mom, she'd lost her son, and I was like, oh my God, that opened that character up for me. So now I had like the three character pillars of the story.
Yeah.
I started building around there. And then as that was evolving, I decided to get rid of the boy. So I kind of came up with the chopper idea where I chopper him off
Love it.
at the bottom of the first act.
It's so pathetic that like the three are left and the others like just chopper away, you know?
And then like Angus is completely stuck there, with Paul and with Mary. And it was about how am I going to sort of build this story around this. And by the way, writing alongside at the same time was this sort of desire to be able to speak intelligently to Alexander because he's so brilliant and he's got such a deep film vocabulary. And I actually went to law school. I didn't go to film school. So I was sort of like, okay, in order to speak to him, I really need to saturate myself. So there's this great place, I'm sure you're familiar with it, called Cinephile on the corner of Sawtelle and Santa Monica. And it's kind of like the last video store, and they have like 30,000 DVDs. And the great thing about that is, I mean, I have Turner Classic Movies on in here all the time because you want to saturate yourself, I think, in cinema as much as you can if you're a screenwriter. I just find, and I'm a huge movie buff, so I like to just have it on all the time.
Love it.
And they have a huge collection, 30,000 titles. So I went to them and I said, these two guys, Greg and JP, who are awesome, are going to run the place. And I said, I'm writing this movie for Alexander Payne. They're like, get the fuck out. Seriously? I was like, yeah. Because I was like, yeah. And like, fuck, you're kidding me, right? I'm like, no, I'm serious. I said, it's kind of a 70s picture. And I seen most of the Ashby, and they're like, yeah, man, but have you seen all the Ashby? And so like we go through and you turn me onto the entire Ashby section. Hal Ashby, who wrote 5, I think, of the greatest films of the latter half of the 20th century from 1970 to 1980. So those 5 pictures for sure. But then it was like, okay, well, now you got to see all the Altman. So I watched all the Altman. You got to do all
Altman, totally, yeah.
And then Rafelson, and Avildsen.
Yeah,
and then
totally.
Basically a couple of like Rain People into Godfather, which I'd already seen. But so I got this insane, through these two guys, Greg and JP, this insane kind of tutorial on where to go and what to watch. They kind of curated the experience for me.
And how often were you speaking to Alexander?
Once every couple of weeks, 3 weeks.
Because I've heard his development process can be slow. He's developing a lot of things and like, were you kind of driving it? Like, I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing now. And like, let's do a check-in and blah, blah, blah.
I would lob pages into him. I would make sure I stayed on his radar because he had other things going on. I'm just like, I kept lobbing stuff in. The first 30 pages broke really fast. I mean, he was really happy. They broke really fast. Like those first 30 pages, once we got through that threshold conversation, probably in about a week, once I figured, okay, this is the story, boom, I had it.
Ooh.
He was like, this is great. This is exactly where we need to go. Right after the helicopter moment is where I had it. And then I wrote the helicopter moment. Then he was like, a helicopter? I was like, yeah. He's like, they get taken away in a helicopter. And I was like, yeah. And he said, isn't that Deus Ex Machina? And I said, that's the point, man.
Yeah.
I said, trust me. I went to these schools and like kids would say like, we're going to have a weekend party. And I'd be like, okay, we're going to like, Meriden or New Milford or New Britain, and then there'd be like Aerosmith's tour bus would show up and you like go to Ohio for the weekend. It was like, and this is, the rich kids that I knew, it's especially at Yale. And I was like, I said, trust me, this would happen. And I was born out actually because we were shooting it. We were at Deerfield and the helicopter scene was about to be shot and we're supposed to land it in the quad. And all of a sudden the trustees come running up and say, you can't land that helicopter in the quad. Like, why? I said, well, because if one of the rotors clips one of these buildings from 1780, that's irreplaceable. So you're going to need a $300 million bond, like to do this. And of course, as a producer, that just the interest on that bond alone was more than the budget of the film.
We're not getting a $300 million bond. That's hilarious.
Yeah. So it's like, so now all of a sudden it's like we're screwed because now this is baked into the scene.
Right. And obviously like he's envisioned it, like you've shot other stuff, like totally. Okay.
Yeah, I'm feeling guilty because I insisted on it. Like, and of course he does what he wants to do because, he's sort of the all being, kind of the master of time, space, and dimension. Like he's the director.
Great and powerful as, yeah.
And then in the background, this kind of very tall, kind of gangly, older trustee raised his hand and said, why don't you just land the helicopter over on the football field? That's where the parents normally land their helicopters. I was like, fantastic. I am completely vindicated. I win. So we ended up doing that. But that helicopter scene was something I had to convince him on, And then once we got that was great. And then the next major juncture, which we kind of talked about for a while, was driving them together. And then I discovered something in writing this one scene that informed the rest of the picture, like throughout consistently. It was basically like, if you put people on the same side of a lie, then they basically have something against the world and they can be intimate with each other. Because the key thing is, why do these people need to talk to each other? Why would this kid, reach out to this kind of smelly older man? What could possibly prompt this? Well, when he slips and falls or when he dislocates his shoulder in the gym, they go to the hospital. And in order to sort of save Paul's job, he says, this is my dad. And we were we were playing hockey over at Squan's Pond, and please don't let's fill out the forms because my mother finds out she'll drag him back into court. This very elaborate lie.
Yeah.
And Paul, who, of course, is Bartman that don't lie, but he's the epitome of integrity with his Stoic philosophy. He goes along with it.
That's right.
He signs up, which is a major character turn for him. And what it does is now they've got this guilty secret that they share and the rest of the world doesn't know. So now they can actually start being real with each other because it's them against the world in a weird way.
Yeah.
Later on, New Kavanaugh shows up and Paul lies about what happened to him and Angus joins in. Same thing, another excuse to go even deeper with the character stuff and the exposition.
The thing that I loved about the movie, now that you're saying that, is like every decision point, you're wondering which way they're going to go. Like, is Paul going to be a Barton man or is he going to, and it really was like a little bit of a like, oh God, what's going to happen? So that was really brilliant.
That's so kind of you to say because, it's funny. I like you that kind of, oh God, what's going to happen feeling that you got there because I find that, and this is, I think, just working on TV for so long, one crime is to be boring, like just don't be boring,
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little sacrilegious, but, because I spent so much time with these great films and I work with this amazing filmmaker and, also movies like 400 Blows by Truffaut and I go, darn, I'm like trying to be this really serious cinematic guy, but I keep thinking about Die Hard the entire time.
Don't be boring. Totally.
Yeah, what would Stephen D'Souza do? Like, how do you move this forward? Interesting. Because I'm like, how can I make this an action movie, but an emotional action movie? Like, how can I constantly put them in situations where they have to make these choices, but not about saving Nakatomi Plaza, about whether or not I'm going to lie to this guy. So, like, how do I freight that up? I know it sounds crazy. I
know exactly what you're talking about. And now that you say that, I'm like, yes. It was an emotional Nakatomi Plaza. Like, that is so brilliant. That is so good. Oh my God, David.
Because I think you just got to keep it interesting and you got to keep the stakes high. And as emotional as you can get with the characters, but credibly and drag it out of them. That's why I like those two lies, those two crises moments, because in real life, people don't give up their shameful secrets and their pain and their ambition and their thwarted dreams and their hopes for love. They don't give those things up in real life, usually at all, but oftentimes without a crisis or without some precipitating moment. So as many crises as you can load in, they organically get the truth of the characters out because, I think ultimately, like Kubrick said, it was like, it's always the feel of it. It's never the think of it. It's in a movie. It's always the feel of it. You want the feeling. But to get there, you need the structure. And that's the hard part.
So tell me when you sort of felt like you rounded the bend and the script was done. Like, how did you guys decide that we're ready to go out? The
whole thing took about 18 months, all in to write it.
Wow. That's impressive.
Thanks. And then I think he shared with Paul fairly early. I think he might have shared with Paul even before it was done. And I remember getting a text at like 3 a.m. I think AP was in Greece. And then, Giamatti was like, I love it, I'm in. And I was like, oh my God, this is real.
It's happening.
Now, all we had to worry about was Paul's his billion schedule, which was a thing in and of itself, right? As a producer, it's like, okay, now we got the actor, now we got to work on his schedule. So, I probably 18 months or so before it was really finding shape. And then Mark Johnson got on about 18 months in and his partner, Tom Williams. And then it was sort of like, okay, what's the next step? And Alexander actually had a movie that ripened, for lack of a better term, right before I had finished the third act. And I was like in the home stretch in the third act. And he was like, I need to tell you. Well, first of all, he was going to do the menu. And then he decided not to do the menu.
Oh my God. Okay.
It kind of was announced in the trades. And I read, I'm like, oh, he's doing the menu. And he was like, no, I decided not to. And then he was going to do this other picture based on this article by Carl Ove Nausgaard and that movie, which was great. And it was so funny because when he said, this is actually ready to go and I think I'm going to do it first, I said, please let me read it. He's like, absolutely, because we're actually very close friends. We're writing a movie together right now. We're writing it.
I heard that, a Western. I'm so excited.
Western, yeah. So, but I mean, we've become very close friends. And so, I was like, oh, fuck, somebody's going first. All right, okay, I guess this is what it is. I understand. Because, we're all, in Hollywood, I think, writers, producers, for lack of a better term, we're all kind of polyamorous. We're all kind of doing stuff with other people all the time.
You have many lovers. It's okay.
You have many lovers. You got to keep the lights on, right? So you got to try to keep as many chainsaws in the air as possible, juggling these chainsaws. So when I found out this one chainsaw was the one that was going to go first, I was sort of like, okay.
What was that other chainsaw? Do you remember?
It's called Untitled Alexander Payne. I think it was Norway Project or whatever. It was about, I think Mads Milkins was attached to do it. And it was about this guy coming over with his daughter. And it was based on this article. But the rights fell out at like the 11th hour. I don't know how it happened. but the rights collapsed at the 11th hour. And all of a sudden it's like, I resigned myself to like, this movie's I'm going to make this movie in 5 to 10 years, if ever, I thought to myself, and then out of nowhere, and I wish ill on no one. And I feel terrible for the young actor who's assigned to play her, the daughter in the movie. But the thing kind of just kind of went away. And all of a sudden I was on deck and I'm like, oh my God, this is fantastic.
Let's make the best of it, shall we? You see, history is not simply the study of the past, it is an explanation of the present.
See, when you say it that way, and throw in some pornography, it's a lot easier to understand.
Okay.
You should try doing more of that in class and less yelling.
Talk to me a little bit about casting, because I heard that was like a tough thing. To find the young man was not easy. You guys like had hundreds upon hundreds of submissions.
Daunting. I mean, we had 800 submissions. Susan Shopmaker went through 800, and like throughout the English-speaking world, she looked at 800 candidates. We narrowed it down to 80, and then really toward the end of the process, I started soliciting the schools that we were going to, like St. Mark's, Northwood, Mart Herman, Deerfield. So they were like, okay, just out of curiosity, because Alexander is really great at finding actors. I mean, I think Reese Witherspoon had done some stuff before election, but he found Chris Klein. I think Shailene Woodley had done one or two things, but he tends to find these young actors and just transform them and create movie stars. He creates movie stars. And so we were looking, and all these kind of high octane young actors were kind of in the pipeline. And that's the tough thing about casting kids, is that if you're going to find a kid who's great, first of all, they're incredibly hard to come by. Secondly, they're probably already taking off and rapidly maturing by the time you get them. So sometimes that kind of genuine adolescent angst is drained out of them. They've been a little more systematized. They've been sort of taught certain tricks and stuff. So, sometimes you'll see actors who are great and they're like 18, 19, but they've already kind of hit a groove you can see the tricks. So we get this audition from the Deerfield Drama Department where we're shooting. And it's this kid, Dominic Sessa. And I wrote that monologue at the end, which begins like, he used to be funny, he used to be great, he used to be more than great, he used to be my dad. That monologue where he talks about his father in the restaurant, which is a page long. And I literally just a line from Paul in the middle, so it wouldn't just be a solid page for whoever was reading it. I was like, I'm going to break this up with like, you can't be serious or something, so the kid doesn't have to do like this much dialogue, right? Anyway, that was the audition piece, that monologue. And I'm glad we used it because it has about 5 distinct turns in it, 5 emotions. And I was always watching the kids on these, the 80 auditions that I watched as a producer, as did Mark Johnson, as did Alexander, looking for how many of the 5 turns an actor would get. And I remember watching Dom's audition. He didn't necessarily get all 5 turns, but what he got was, he got the essence and the truth of every turn. It was like he was just being it. He wasn't acting it. And he's such an incredibly handsome kid, but handsome in a really kind of interesting, kind of haunting way. Kind of very high cheekbones, kind of Caravaggio angel, kind of like brooding. He's got a real charisma and addition to talent. And he's the sweetest kid. And he nailed this thing. He nailed like 3 of the 5. And I remember all of us going, God damn it, that's amazing. This kid's a natural. And Eigil Brill, who was our DP, was like, he's, this guy is very Nordic. And he's sort of like, I think I want to light him. Look at this. Look at how fantastic his face is.
Was he in the drama department? Like, did he want to really act? Like, what was his background?
He started being a hockey player and a skateboarder who broke his femur and sort of was bedridden and couldn't do sports, and picked up drama and like had done like 3 or 4 plays.
No way.
He's like, he was built in the lab. He's a film actor. And I mean, I was supposed to play a part in this movie, and Alexander wanted to cast me, and he was like, no, it's going to be great. You'll play Father Joe, the priest at the beginning. It'll be great. I was like, because I'd done some voice acting and stuff for Family Guy and American Dad when I was on those shows. And I'm so bad. They put the camera on me in my audition, and I spiked the lens immediately. I just like look straight into the lens, and it's very apparent that I'm just no good at that thing that is, a magical thing. It was so clear that this kid, I thought, you figure, turn a camera on for like a world-class director and point a camera who's auditioning for a world-class director. I would just be like, he was absolutely natural, like didn't spike the lens, like from the first audition. And so, Dom was just Angus from the beginning. We just knew.
Talk about Joy Randolph.
Oh, Divine was somebody we wanted pretty much from the get-go. I mean, she was discussed early on. As soon as I kind of conceived of Mary being, I kind of went through it. I figured out who she needed to be. I wanted to be as real as possible, So it made total sense to me that I'm like, okay, look at the historical, like the historicity of it. Like, what is the truth here? She was working as a cafeteria manager. When I was there, those women would be either Black or Eastern European. And I'd come up because my brothers were janitors at Wesleyan and at the courthouse in Middletown, Connecticut. So I grew up around working people of all races. And I was like, I saw that mostly it was poor kids going and a lot of Black kids were going. Like when I was a little boy in Vietnam, like my friends' older brothers or their uncles were going and getting killed. So I knew that she might lose, her son was real. And I very much wanted it to be, as accurate as possible. The fact that this kid couldn't afford, that the scholarships weren't there, which they weren't necessarily in 1969, 1970, and the financial aid wouldn't be there. And, unlike these rich kids, he couldn't go. And like my father, who went to Yale on the GI Bill, that he would go to war and end up going to college on the GI Bill. I was kind of using my own history and the truth of American history to try to get to the essence of the character and the essence of the dynamic, and to create, I think, some veracity in the narrative, but also to keep it as human as possible. So I knew there was a lot going on, and we needed an actor who could do both comedy, because I thought it was important that she be hiding her pain or dealing with her pain first through this wry sense of humor, because I find that anger and humor are the two things that really mask pain in life. It was important to me that the person could have the depth to play the pathos, but not just the pathos, also that kind of wry comedy that lays on top of the pathos, because oftentimes it's anger and humor that hides pain. That's just my feeling.
And that's a real hallmark of Alexander Payne's work too. It's like you guys were really simpatico in that, it seems.
Yeah, the Venn diagram of Alexander and I, in terms of the way we look at things, are like this. There's a huge intersection.
Exactly, overlap. Amazing.
Which just makes for a great partnership, and I'm really, really lucky to have him in my life as a friend and as a creative collaborator. But anyway, so Davine was like, have you seen Dolomite? And I was like, yeah, I love Dolomite. He's like, fantastic. I think we should get her. She's not Davine. I think she's amazing. I'm like, I think she's amazing too.
Did you have that in your head when you were writing, or did he say that once the script was finished?
Once the script was finished. He might have mentioned it while I was writing her too, because I was kind of aware. But it's going to work out, because I know she was doing Only Murders at the time, but she was doing other stuff, and she's obviously very much in demand. She's a brilliant actor, and so we auditioned a bunch of people, not knowing if we could get her. And by the time push came to shove, and we discovered her schedule had cleared, we were ecstatic that we got her, because I think she's just
so good,
incredible.
She's so
just
good.
Incredible.
So, David, talk to me about your observations of Alexander as a filmmaker on set. Because to me, like, one of Alexander's hallmarks is all the stuff we've been talking about, the humor and the pathos and the drama and balancing all those things. But also, I read something, it's like location. It's like every movie he does is so of a piece and feels so authentic to whatever it is, whatever story you're trying to tell, whether that's Sideways or... What were your sort of observations of him?
Alexander's he's like he was born to be a director. He just sort of is just in the moment. If fish rots from the head down, you've heard that aphorism, right? I mean, it's all about the leadership, because in television, sort of the writer and the showrunner is sort of the person who sets the tone and really dictates director in film. And it was a different dynamic for me to watch, but he first of all moved to Massachusetts, spent 9 months there scouting.
Unbelievable.
He would just send me these pictures, amazing photographs. So 9 months saturating himself in the culture because he wanted to get Massachusetts right. The irony being that if I just said it in Connecticut, where I'm from, then, I had to adjust, because Western Mass and Southern Central Connecticut, believe it or not, culturally a little different. So I had to adjust my vernacular the way I write, because Massachusetts is a little bit different.
Wow.
But he wanted that verisimilitude. So, going there, kind of absorbing it, he did that. He would make adjustments, minor, tiny adjustments based on the Massachusetts of it all, On set, I've never met a greater gentleman. I mean, he's what I call a coat and tie director.
Oh, a coat and tie director, meaning he shows up literally and sort of metaphorically.
Yeah, and he shows up on time, knows exactly what he wants because he's thought it through. He's lived in the environment. He knows precisely what he wants. He was, so generous and communicative with Eigel Brild, our DP. They a real sort of sense. It's a family affair, so you really get the sense that he, by the way, Kevin Tent, who's a good friend of mine.
I love Kevin Tent so much. He saved so many of my movies.
Yeah, he's sort of the Winston Wolfe.
Generous genius.
He's the Winston Wolfe, like from Pulp Fiction. He's the Winston Wolfe of editing.
Totally.
He can just step in and wrench on stuff and fix it, so he's communicating with Kevin at the time, but Kevin, Wendy, Chuck, so many people that he works with, has done so many of his movies, like, when Ryan Warren Smith, who's amazing, who's our production designer, was involved with that. And it was like, he just is very generous and very egalitarian. No one ever questions the vision because the vision's so apparent and it infuses everything we do on set. So calm. As a producer, my role was to bird dog like little things like, okay, I remember talking to Wendy about the ecclesiastical robes. Like, okay, in the liturgical calendar, it would be Christmas, 1970. And I was raised Catholic, but I converted to the Episcopal Church. And I, having been raised in that sort of high theater, high drama environment, I'm like, those robes are wrong. That's got to change. Or the picture of Curtis, which was originally huge. I'm like, I think this is a courtesy for these people. They don't really love him as much as we love him. And the picture would be smaller. It's like little things like that. Or the cigarettes were stolen from Teddy, so Teddy might push back when Angus offers one, like little things like that. To just sort of lean in. But I would always kind of like lean in and make a suggestion. A lot of the suggestions I made, he might not have bitten at, but it's like, you lean in, you kind of whisper in his ear. Because my thing is, I never want to be heard by the actors, because that's a sacred relationship between Alexander and whoever he's directing. So he's just super generous, super calm. Like, we make our days. Sometimes it was like, we'd be shooting 8 days and it'd be like, yeah, I think that's enough.
Oh my God.
Like, what? It's like, no, we got it. And that level of it speaks to his excellence as a filmmaker.
And experience and confidence. Just like, I've been here so many times. We don't need to overdo this, Yeah,
I don't need it in the wide a second time.
Yeah.
Or I have it close up. Like, what blew my mind is one of the days I was off set, I watched the dailies for the walk and talk coming out of the party, which starts with, well, that was a catastrophe. It's like, this is why I don't go to parties. It's like, why do we want to go back there? I was really doing well with Elise. The niece, that whole scene,
yes.
That walk. That was, I think, 1 take, maybe 2 takes.
Shut up.
I think it was 2 takes. I remember watching the dailies because I had to come back for I was gone for 10 days. And I watched the dailies and I called up and I was like, did I miss something? I said, it's a great, but where are the other takes? It's like, we didn't need it. We had it. And I mean, any other filmmaker, never mind. Let's talk about just getting the audio right. He knew, I think they had lavs on. So, the radio mics on. So we got it. We didn't film it or anything. But I mean, it's that walk and talk in the dark. Obviously it's late. People want to go home, but if you have it, you have it. But so many directors would do it 7 times.
100%. Just to make sure you're covered. And that is like the beauty of his experience. That is so amazing. Okay. So he was a perfect gentleman. Were there any particularly crazy days that you recall or just moments that maybe stick out in your mind as a great day or a horrible day or a, great moment?
Second day of shooting, we're in this abandoned nunnery. And the sky gets really, and I'm from New England. I'm born and raised in New England. So when you look up in the sky and you see a certain kind of gunmetal gray quality of cloud, and you can almost taste the moisture in the air and feel the chill coming up, you're like, this is a blizzard, And let me tell you something, as you know, if anybody knows what's going to happen on a set before anybody else, it's the Teamsters. So the Teamsters are packing out. This is day 2, and it's the first day we're shooting with Dave and mine, and we're up in the nunnery. We're in the kitchen area because it's the Newlywed Game scene.
Okay,
right?
okay.
Dave Vine is just nailing it. I mean, she's got a rhythm. Generators go off. Done. God. We're done. Backing up.
They just pulled the power.
Yeah, done. Well, there've been a conversation, but we've been pushing and pushing and pushing. You know how it is. You push and push.
Yeah, sure.
This is our heart out. We're done. Now, the second largest blizzard in the history of Boston hits. And so we get complete. And this is during COVID, guys. Okay?
Oh my God.
COVID protocols. We're getting tested every day. So now we're at the Marriott Bonvoy in Roxbury, snowed in. I have not gone to the market. There's no food. There's no room service at this Marriott Bonvoy. So I had stolen cans of tuna salad from the Teamster truck. And I had some wheat bread that I might have bought. And as a joke, I bought I bought a tall boy. I bought a Miller High Life tall boy. Miller High Life. So I'm in
You're I haven't seen these in a while. I'm just going to get one.
This will be fun. So I basically, I was literally stuck in my room at the Marriott Bonvoy with absolutely nothing to eat. And then thankfully, Tom Williams calls up because I bought a whole bunch of pasta. You want to come drink some wine? I'm like, yes, please. So we got shut down for a day. Next day, I went to the Boston Museum of Fine Art. It was open, but there had been like a foot and a half of snow, so nobody was there. So I spent 3 hours in that museum alone, which was incredible.
Oh my God.
That was one of the kind of hiccups. At one point, Mark Johnson got sick with food poisoning, but he was coming in from another set. So there were like 4 or 5 people with producerial authority on the show. Another time, I ate at this place in Cambridge, and I got laid out for like a day. So every once in a while, like, there'll be some food poisoning that'll happen, or, a blizzard will sweep in. So we definitely had those complications. But again, there was also a lot of, at the midpoint of filming 20 Days In, Alexander like rented out a sports bar in New England College Town, Massachusetts College Town. We just all partied. It was like just great.
See ya.
See ya.
Was the edit of the Holdovers extensive?
It was, but I think it's emblematic of, it really wasn't other people pressuring AP. I think Kevin and Alexander have this dynamic, and they get in and I actually talked to Kevin extensively about this the other day. And I was in the Bay. I saw the first third of the movie. They brought me in for the first third and I gave notes and stuff. But Alexander edits both in LA and in Omaha, and where he's from. And he kind of toggles between. And it's a very, very slow and exacting, like nanosecond by nanosecond process. But it was a question of tone and a question of length. I think the first cut was like 2 hours and 45 minutes. There was a lot of stuff in there. They would kind of flip a scene, or they'd reorder some of the cuts in the party scene, which I remember when I wrote it, it was like an 8-page scene. The finger painting scene was originally going to be Mostly Naked Marvin, who's the kid in the underwear. They were going to grab him, and over the butcher paper, they were going to like roll him all through the paint and get him all covered in paint. Because that's what happened to me when I was 5 at a party.
Stop.
Yeah, this was like 1969. And I was at this party, and these 2 college co-eds like decided that they wanted to paint with this little boy. And I think I was actually almost nude or something, but they were rolling me around. There were pictures of me running around in my underwear with this paint on. I was like, that'll be a great scene. That turned out not to be practical. So the first kiss scene was supposed to actually start with this kid or end up with this kid rolling around in paint. But, the party scene got kind of cut up and reordered a little bit. Yeah. And that's the editorial process. That's sort of him going, what do we wait? How do we do it? There was an ending in the movie that ends on Mary sitting in Paul's chair, and we had to decide, how do we want to weight the picture? And that was a beautiful ending too, but we kind of want to recalibrate it and how long the movie is. But I mean, just it's a testament to, I think the film's a beautiful film. I think it's a great film. I think as long as we took an editing, as long as he and Kevin took an editing, and by the way, he'd bring friends into the Bay, and we'd all sit around the editing suite, and we'd all sit around and give notes, and
he invites people in.
Yeah. Close friends to watch it, and like I always like to say, it's I have this phrase when it comes to stuff in TV, which is blue chips and potato chips. Like you always want to hang on to your blue chips, but you can give your potato chips away. So like, and at a certain point, there are no potato chips left because the movie is exactly what it needs to be. There's nothing to give away. And it's the figuring out, like, what am I giving away and why am I giving it away? And as a writer, it's devastating because, I've been editing so many times where you're just like, sometimes you look at a first cut, like through like this,
Yeah.
I remember seeing the first assembly, the first third of the movie, just thinking, this is fantastic, and it was early in the process, and it just got better and better. And it's a testament to Kevin's talent and Alexander's talent, really.
You famously sold the film, and I don't know if you were at Toronto when you had that incredible screening that, you guys weren't even at the Toronto Film Festival formally. You were sort of screening alongside it. I think you have the biggest sale ever, not even in the festival. It's like alongside the festival, but it's the biggest on record. Were you there? Were you present for that?
Wasn't there for that one. Neither was Alexander. I think they wanted to keep us out of the mix there. I think Mark Johnson was there. Obviously, Bill Block was there.
You must have gotten the play-by-play. I mean, it's rare that you get such hysteria.
Oh yeah, it was nuts. I mean, I was in Oregon with my wife's family, river rafting. There's the Rogue River. We just kind of float down the Rogue River, and I remember getting off the river and looking at my phone, and it's blown up, and it was Mark Johnson saying, "We just made this record sale," and I was like, it was awesome. I mean, it was like,
my God.
The whole thing was a dream because it's a love story. I mean, it's a love story and it's a memory play. So, I mean,
yeah,
so close to the movie to hear that, I was just like, this is fantastic. And it was just so great.
then you kind of like had this very smart rollout, what felt like to me like a smart rollout, where you guys weren't like trying to break down doors. It was just like the film had this like word of mouth sort of groundswell, and now you guys have 5 Academy Award nominations and you're one of them, and it's just incredible.
It's great. It's awesome. I mean, look, I think Focus didn't just pay attention to us. They didn't just like distribute us. They like lavished loving care on us. I mean, they were like, even to the point of like, I was going to say the waiting, to quote Tom Penny, the waiting is the hardest part. Because it was like, we had the sale, and we're like, it was close enough to go, okay, they're going to try to roll out right now. It was like a few months from Christmas. We waited a year. They waited a year.
Right.
Which at the time was not really frustrating. I was like, oh man, because I thought we had something, and I knew we had something, but I didn't know exactly what we had.
Yeah.
And you just want to get it out there because you're like, I know this is good. I know that the emotions that I'm feeling, I think are universal. I'm not sure. So the waiting was the hardest part. But when they did it really smart. They old school platformed it like they used to do back in the day. They start in like 6 cinemas, and then they go to 30, and then they go to 140, and then the wider rollout. And I think it allowed word of mouth to build. And I think the social media component of it and people talking about it online, it really helped us tremendously. So the wisdom, I think there's tremendous wisdom behind the way they did it. And I've always been consistently impressed with Focus and their capacity to do the job. Yeah.
I think they've done I did a movie with them. And again, I'm so impressed with their leadership and their belief in filmmakers and proper cinema and the theater experience. And even like the materials, I love the sort of retro, warm nature of those materials. Like I've seen like several one sheets, and they're all so good and sort of painterly and just great. Anyways, I could go on and on about it, David, but this has been like absolutely delightful. You are such a good storyteller. Thank you so much for coming on, and I hope you'll come back.
I would love to. Are you kidding me? Anytime. Call me anytime. I would love to chat with you. I had a great time. Thank you so much.
Oh my God, you're wonderful. All right. Thanks, David. I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Cheers.
Oh, David Hemingson, what a delight. Didn't you love him, Bex?
He was great. He, like you said at the beginning, he was there from the very start of this movie, was there in the weeds during production, through the casting, through all the craziness, and now he just got nominated for an Oscar. So I like that we're mixing old movies and current movies.
Yeah.
It's very fun to do some of these films that have just been nominated for Oscars and kind of catch all of these producers and writers and directors at such a fun, pivotal time in their careers.
Totally. I mean, this guy was a very successful TV writer and showrunner for a long time. And you know, I think still for a lot of people in Hollywood, working in film is still the brass ring. And getting nominated for an Oscar is just something I think we all dream of. I mean, I'm just being honest. And this guy was so lovely and authentic and grounded, and just like, he was someone I just want to hang out with. And he's like gone through this whole thing. You know, the movie is really favored in a lot of categories. I mean, I think Paul Giamatti is favored to win, and Divine Joy is favored to win. And you know, he has a real shot. So it was really, really cool just to talk to him about the whole process and see how excited he was still. You know, he's not like jaded. He's not like, oh, whatever, you know?
No, he's very excited and very proud of the movie. And I loved that he was talking about how, as a writer, you have to really make sure you're not too precious about the material, which allowed him to change some things kind of on the fly, which was very cool.
Yeah.
And I think my favorite part of this whole story was hearing his Paul Giamatti connection and how that kind of magically came together, because you know, I think you have some sort of connection as well, right?
I do, Bex. I love that you just managed to mention that. I think Paul Giamatti's dad. I don't know how well known this is, but I think it's probably pretty well known. But Bart Giamatti was president of Yale. I mean, Paul comes from like really like an incredible family. And the second part of that is that Paul Giamatti's mother, Tony Giamatti, was my husband's English teacher at a day school called Hopkins in New Haven. And Ted's big like dining out like brag story is that Tony Giamatti loved Ted. And thought Ted was like going to be president of the United States. And so whenever we have a few drinks, he's like, well, listen to this. Paul Giamatti's mom thinks that I am really like spectacular. So no, it was so interesting though, because David Hemingson's father knew Paul's father. And I think that there's just a certain quality of like New England day schools and boarding schools that you kind of have to like observe it very closely or live it to really understand it. And I think that's part of the reason that Alexander Payne was so drawn to David, because David had written that spec script about the New England boarding school scene. And I think that quality of authenticity, it's hard to like imitate, right? You kind of have to understand it or you don't. And I think that was one of the great parts of this movie, is that it felt like really real. It kind of felt like a documentary, you know, there was like a little bit of a verite style to it and nostalgia. And so I think that's why people are really, it's another movie that like people are finding, right? Like it's been in the theaters for a while. It didn't totally hit 100% right away, but it was given time and people love it. And I feel like people are going back to see it and they're talking about it. And it feels like a little bit old school in a really great way. So that was a really fun one. We're doing all these bits of trivia, which our loyal listeners seem to really enjoy. So why don't you kick it off?
Yes. So the first one is that the entire film was shot in real practical locations. No sets or sound stages were used, which goes along with what we just talked about, how authentic it feels and looks. So that makes complete sense, because you're right. These New England boarding schools have such regal, majestic, kind of specific looks. So I can't imagine trying to build that on a stage somewhere.
Oh my God. And how much did we love that chopper story of like where the helicopter was going to land, and Alex Payne didn't feel it was believable. And then like the headmaster was like, why don't you shoot it over on the football field where they normally land? That was so awesome.
Okay, so this is a fun one. On the day of shooting the scene that Angus calls home, the actor Dominic flubbed a take because he didn't know how to dial. And he had to be shown how, because it hadn't occurred to anyone that he had never used a rotary phone before.
Oh my God. I believe that. Have you seen those memes where like a parent will pay their child like $200 if they can figure out how to dial a rotary phone, and like they just can't do it? Everyone's got to go look those up. They're brilliant. Like they don't know that the rotary has to return to zero. Like they just keep trying to catch the rotary. Bex, do you know how to use a rotary phone?
I do. But only because I've never actually used one, but I know how to use one, honestly, because of like old movies and TV shows, seeing people use it.
Okay, I'll believe you. Okay, what's the next one?
Alexander Payne loathes the Christmas film label and hopes that this movie will stand on its own and not just be considered a Christmas film.
Well, I'm sure it will. Of course it will. But like, I think when you have a Christmas film, you have this opportunity to make so much more money. So I don't think he should like turn his nose up at that, because Christmas films, people watch every Christmas. Do you know what I mean?
There are, of course, the, cheesy Christmas movies that everyone watches, but there are some real, genuinely good classic movies that are considered Christmas films, like The Family Stone. Like, I can understand where he's coming from.
It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street. Like there are some really, really great ones. But I get it. If you're like a director like Alex Payne, you don't want to be put in the box with like Hallmark movies. I get that. But I'm sure in the long run he'll be very happy. Okay, guys. It has been another fun one. We love you guys so much. Don't forget to follow us. Check out our merch. On our Stay Gold website, staygoldfeatures.com. Get a hoodie. Go ahead and get a hoodie. We'll catch you next time. Don't forget to stay gold.
Stay gold.